There are souls among us who carry silence like a second skin. Those who have walked through valleys so shadowed even language fails to name them, yet in that darkness something ancient stirs. Not brokenness, but transformation. Suffering, you see, is not merely an affliction. It is a crucible. And those who endure it are not cursed, but called. Their tears are not wasted. They are woven into the very fabric of what it means to be human. Just as the deepest roots drink from hidden waters, the most resilient spirits are nourished by unseen depths. Life, in all its mystery, does not err. Every collapse is an echo of a greater rising. Every silence, a note in the symphony of becoming. And perhaps, just perhaps, the wound is not the end of the story, but the place where the divine has chosen to speak. You know, there's something ancient, something almost mythic about the way pain works on a person. And we don't talk about it enough, not honestly anyway. We're a culture so obsessed with comfort, with ease, with freedom from burden, that we've forgotten one of the oldest truths of the human experience. That suffering is not always a mistake. It is not always an enemy. Sometimes, more often than we'd like to admit, it's a form of transformation, a kind of sacred fire that burns away everything in us that is false or fragile or unnecessarily adorned. And what's left is something real, something weighty, something unshakable. You meet people who've suffered deeply, and there's this gravity to them, isn't there? They walk differently. They speak with fewer words, but every word lands. They're not caught up in superficial nonsense. There's a depth behind their eyes. And it's not just sadness, it's wisdom, like they've walked through something that reordered their understanding of life. And in a way they have. Because pain forces a confrontation. It drags you to the edge of yourself. It makes you sit face to face with the things you'd rather ignore, your fears, your dependencies, your illusions about control. And when it's deep enough, it doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't politely knock and say, "May I come in?" No, it tears the floor out from under you and dares you to find your footing again. And in that space, you learn, not intellectually, not from books or lectures. You learn viscerally, in your bones, what it means to be human. You learn humility. You learn that you are not invincible, that life does not owe you anything, that control is largely an illusion. And yet, you also learn resilience. You discover that somehow you keep breathing, that even after the worst day of your life, the sun still rises, the heart, fractured though it may be, keeps beating. And somewhere in that contradiction, in the breaking and the surviving, a kind of alchemy begins. Now, we usually think of alchemy in medieval terms, turning lead into gold. But the real alchemy, the kind that matters, happens in the soul. It's the transmutation of raw suffering into strength, bitterness into compassion, grief into grace. And that doesn't happen overnight. It's not automatic. Many people are broken by pain and stay that way, but some allow the pain to work on them, to shape them, to discipline them. They don't just endure the fire, they become it. And it's important to say, this transformation isn't dramatic, it's not loud, it often goes unnoticed, but over time, it builds something unshakable inside a person. Not bravado, not performance, something quieter, something enduring, a kind of strength you can lean on, the kind that doesn't collapse when life gets hard. And often those people who possess it, they didn't choose their suffering. It chose them, but what they chose was how to respond to it. And that choice, made again and again, refined them. There's something deeply noble about that, something sacred, and I don't use that word lightly. because it means there's meaning in the pain, not in the suffering itself necessarily, but in what it makes possible. The suffering opens a door that would have otherwise remained closed. And on the other side of that door is a different person, a deeper person, not superior, not special, just real, more aligned, more truthful, and perhaps more capable of love. It's a strange thing, really, how suffering alters the way we see, not just what we see, but how we see. There's something about having gone through the depths that sharpens perception in a way nothing else can. You're not the same afterward. You can't be. And the world, it doesn't appear the same either. It's not that everything becomes darker, though it can seem that way for a time. It's more that the veil is lifted. You start noticing things other people miss, subtleties, cracks in the mask, the quiet pain behind someone's forced smile, the hesitation in their voice when they say they're fine. There's a kind of sensitivity that emerges. Not weakness, not fragility, sensitivity, a precision of awareness, a way of tuning into the deeper textures of reality, like turning up the resolution on your soul. And people who've suffered deeply, they don't just develop that as a survival mechanism, they carry it forward. It becomes a way of being, a lens. It's been shaped in fire. They see beauty differently too, not in the grand, polished, orchestrated things, but in the overlooked, the ordinary, the fleeting, a quiet sunrise, a moment of kindness, a child's laugh after a long silence. They don't rush past these things because they know, often from experience, how easily such moments can vanish, how precious it all is, how fragile. They've sat in the stillness of grief and realized how loud the world used to be. They've learned to listen, and not just with their ears, with their whole being. This kind of perception, it often makes them seem different. You'll notice it in conversation. They don't interrupt as much. They're slower to speak, quicker to notice. They observe before they react. They're not scanning the room to dominate it. They're studying it, feeling the atmosphere, reading the room with an intensity that isn't showy but deeply attuned. They recognize pain in others with startling accuracy because they've known it themselves. And the nervous system doesn't forget that kind of thing. It remembers. And here's the paradox. The more someone has suffered, the more they seem to see both the tragedy and the beauty of life, side by side. Not as contradictions, but as partners in a deeper dance. They can hold joy and sorrow at the same time. They can smile with tears in their eyes because their vision isn't just wide, it's deep. It pierces through appearances, through performance, right down to essence. And this is where their gift becomes costly, because when you see that much, when you feel that much, you can't just shut it off. You carry the weight of it with you. You become the person others come to when they're falling apart, because they know, even without words, that you understand. You're not guessing. You're not offering cliche comforts. You know. And that knowing, that sacred burden, is often earned in the crucible of your own pain. So when people say, I wish I didn't feel so much, or why am I so sensitive? They're often saying it from a place of quiet anguish. But I would argue that what they see, the emotional truths they pick up on, the weight of their sensitivity, it's not a curse. It's a form of sight. It's what allows them to reach people others can't, to heal in ways logic never could, to notice what matters before it's too late. There's a moment, sometimes it comes early, sometimes much later, when a person who has suffered deeply begins to ask a different kind of question. Not why me, not how do I escape this, but something far more dangerous, far more profound. What does this mean? And not just what it means personally, but existentially, cosmically even. Because pain, especially sustained, soul-wrenching pain, demands an answer. And if you stay with it long enough, if you resist the urge to numb it or explain it away too quickly, it starts pointing to something else, something deeper. People who've been through great suffering often develop an obsession, not with the suffering itself, but with the pattern beneath it. They begin to sense that life isn't just random chaos, that even in the darkest moments, something was moving, something was being revealed slowly, painfully, almost like a sculptor chiseling away at stone. They begin to suspect that maybe the pain was not the end of the story, but the beginning of another chapter, one they couldn't see at the time. And so they start connecting the dots, backwards at first. They look over the landscape of their lives and they see how certain events, which once felt cruel and senseless, shaped them in ways they now wouldn't trade. They remember the moment everything fell apart and realize it was the same moment they stopped living someone else's life and began walking their own. They see how a loss shattered their illusion of control, but awakened a depth of love they didn't know. How the betrayal that crushed them made space for a self-respect they'd never developed before. It's not romanticizing pain. It's not pretending it didn't hurt. It's recognizing that in the ruins, a seed was planted, and from that seed, something unexpected grew, something stronger, truer, something that couldn't have emerged any other way. And this pursuit of meaning, it becomes a kind of compass, a way of navigating life not based on comfort or convenience, but on alignment. Alignment with something larger, something transcendent. It changes the questions they ask. They stop wondering how to avoid discomfort and start asking how to live with integrity, how to live with purpose, how to take the hand they were dealt and play it with as much courage and clarity as possible. And they start to notice something strange. When they live like this, they suffer better, not less, but better, with more dignity, with more awareness. They learn to hold their pain with open hands rather than clenched fists. And that simple posture changes everything. It doesn't erase the sorrow, but it gives it context. It gives it form. Because here's the thing, meaning doesn't cancel suffering, it redeems it. It draws a thread through it. A thread that over time can be woven into something coherent, maybe even something beautiful. That doesn't mean you'll understand it all. Most of us won't. But the pursuit itself, the commitment to live as if there is a pattern worth discovering, that's enough. That's where the transformation begins. And in this process, they become different people. Not perfect, not always peaceful, but anchored. They're not just reacting to life anymore, they're responding to it. Not as victims of fate, but as stewards of a story. Their story. One that might just help someone else find the strength to keep going. Because once you start to glimpse the thread of meaning in your own suffering, you realize something astonishing, that your life is not an accident, that none of it was wasted, and that even the most painful chapters were part of a larger, unfinished masterpiece. Because the ones who suffer deeply and seek meaning relentlessly do not just survive, they begin to live as if their lives were always meant to matter. There's something deeply paradoxical about the way suffering shapes a person. As much as we try to avoid it, as much as we wish it were something we could run from, it inevitably changes us in ways we don't expect. And perhaps most profoundly, it often makes us more open to beauty. Now, that might sound counterintuitive. You might think that the more we suffer, the less we can appreciate the beauty around us. It's a common assumption. After all, pain tends to make the world feel smaller, narrower. It seems to close us off, makes everything feel a little less vibrant. But in truth, it's the opposite. There's something about being broken, being cracked open by life, that makes us more capable of seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary. When you've suffered deeply, you develop an appreciation for the simplest things, the small gestures, the fleeting moments, the things that before would have gone unnoticed, now they stand out. A brief moment of connection with a stranger, the sound of leaves rustling on a quiet evening, the way light shifts through a window at sunset. Before, those things might have seemed trivial, but now there's something sacred about them. They carry a weight, a resonance that the mind cannot fully explain, but the heart recognizes instantly. And when you've been to the edge of despair, when you've stared down the abyss and made your peace with it, the ability to notice these moments, to savor them, becomes an act of grace. It's as if the pain has cleared away the distractions, the noise, the excess. It strips away the superficial layers that once made everything seem so important. And suddenly what's left is purity, the raw, unadulterated beauty of life itself, in all its messiness, in all its imperfection. There is a vulnerability to beauty when you've suffered, a recognition that it too is fragile. It can break, fade, vanish. But it's all the more precious for it. Now, this isn't to say that people who have suffered are always in a state of constant appreciation, walking around in a perpetual state of awe. Far from it. They too get caught in the hustle and grind of daily life. They get tired, they get frustrated, they forget, just like the rest of us. But the difference is, when they do stop to pay attention, when they do allow themselves to see, they see with an intensity that's rare. They don't just glance at the world, they absorb it, they drink it in. And it's not just the grand moments they appreciate, it's the subtlety, the texture of life. They notice how a child's face lights up when they're excited, how a friend's eyes soften when they talk about something they love, how rain smells when it first hits the pavement. These aren't small things to them. They're the essence of life itself. They've learned to see what others overlook. And it's in this process, this quiet rediscovery of beauty, that they find healing, because beauty has a way of undoing the knots inside us. It opens something up. It softens the edges. It reminds us, if only for a moment, that we're not just here to endure the storm. We're here to witness it, to live through it, and to experience the full spectrum of what life has to offer. And that includes the beauty that often comes in the wake of suffering. After the storm has passed, there's a clarity in the air. The world is sharp, crisp, renewed, and the person who suffered understands that clarity intimately. They don't take it for granted. They cherish it, knowing it won't last forever. But for now, for this brief instant, it's enough. So when you meet someone who has suffered deeply, don't be surprised if they seem to possess a quiet kind of wonder, a gentle awe. It's not that they're oblivious to the darkness. They know it well. They've walked through it sometimes inch by inch. But what they also know, what they've learned through the fire, is that beauty doesn't just exist in the light. It can be found in the cracks, in the brokenness, in the moments of stillness after the storm. And once they've seen it, once they've recognized that beauty is woven through the very fabric of suffering, they can never unsee it. It's easy to underestimate the power of silence, especially in a world like ours where everyone seems so desperate to be heard. We fill the air with noise, opinions, distractions, as if talking louder, talking more somehow makes us more real. But there's a kind of person who doesn't follow that script. A person who has suffered deeply often becomes fluent in silence. And I don't mean avoidance or passive withdrawal. I mean a deep, intentional stillness, the kind of quiet that listens more than it speaks, that holds space rather than rushing to fill it. You see this in people who've gone through real pain, not surface-level discomfort, but soul-altering, identity-stripping pain. They've learned something the rest of us often miss. That not everything needs to be said. That not every moment calls for commentary. That the deepest things we carry often defy language, and trying to force them into words too soon or too carelessly can actually cheapen them. So they wait, they listen, they observe, they sit in the discomfort that silence often brings, because they've already sat in worse. They're not trying to escape it. They've learned that silence isn't empty, it's alive. It speaks in its own way, not with words, but with presence, with patience, with depth. And something incredible happens in that stillness. The person who listens without rushing, without rehearsing their reply, becomes a kind of sanctuary for others. People begin to open up in their presence, not because they're coaxed or persuaded, but because they feel seen, truly seen, and maybe for the first time in a long time, heard without judgment, without interruption. It's subtle, but powerful, like sitting beside a mountain. The mountain isn't doing anything, but its very being stabilizes you. Those who've suffered deeply know how sacred that kind of space is, because they've longed for it themselves. They know what it feels like to cry out and be met with noise, to ache and be drowned out by well-meaning advice or intellectual chatter. So they become what they never received. They learn to sit with someone else's pain without needing to fix it, explain it, or sanitize it. Just to be there, to remain, to witness. That's not weakness. That's strength, disciplined strength, the kind that's not interested in performing, the kind that understands that real healing often happens in the spaces between words, in the eye contact that doesn't flinch, in the breath shared in mutual sorrow, in the quiet nod that says, I know. I've been there too. And here's the paradox again, because suffering tends to create these paradoxes. The more deeply someone has been hurt, the more likely they are to become a safe place for others, because they know what words can't do. They know what presence alone can offer. They've learned that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can say is nothing. Just be there. Just be. And in that, they become rare, not because they're better or more noble, but because they've chosen stillness over reaction, attunement over assertion, depth over noise. And in doing so, they create room for others to breathe, to unravel, to come back together. That kind of silence is not absence, it's attention. It's devotion, it's reverence for the mystery and fragility of the human soul. You don't forget people like that. You may not even remember what they said, but you remember how it felt to be around them, the safety, the stillness, the sacredness of their presence. Because the ones who've made peace with silence become the ones who speak most powerfully without ever needing to raise their voice. It's a peculiar thing how those who've endured the harshest forms of suffering often become the gentlest people you'll ever meet. Not soft in the fragile sense, not delicate like glass, but soft in spirit. There's a kindness in them that isn't performative. It's not trying to impress anyone. It's not about being nice or agreeable. It's a strength, a quiet, grounded kind of compassion that comes from having known what it's like to break, not in theory, but in reality, to be shattered, to lose parts of yourself you thought you needed in order to survive. And here's what's interesting. When someone's been broken like that, and they choose to come back not as they were, but with more gentleness, more care, they carry a different kind of power. It's not the power to control or to win or to dominate. It's the power to understand, to stand with, to embrace even what is most painful in others, because they've already had to embrace it in themselves. You see this when they speak with someone who's suffering. They don't flinch. They don't rush to offer answers. They don't get uncomfortable with tears or anger or silence, because they've been there. They've walked that road, and they know that sometimes the only thing that person needs is not advice, but someone willing to sit beside them in the dark. Someone who won't leave when things get messy. Someone who isn't afraid of pain because they've already made peace with their own. That kind of compassion isn't taught in schools. It's not something you can fake. It's forged. Forged in nights spent awake, wrestling with grief. Forged in seasons of isolation, rejection, despair. And somewhere along the way, somewhere in the deep end of all that pain, these people make a decision. I will not pass it on. I will not make others pay for what life took from me. And that decision, made not once but over and over again, is what makes them different. It's what gives them that rare ability to respond to cruelty with patience, to meet aggression with grace, to meet fear with presence. Not because they're weak, but because they're rooted. And being rooted means you don't need to retaliate to prove your worth. You don't need to shout over others to feel seen. You don't need to win to matter. You simply are. And that's enough. Now, that doesn't mean they're passive. Far from it. There's a fire in them too, but it's tempered, controlled. They'll protect others fiercely, especially the vulnerable, especially those who remind them of their former selves, because deep down they remember what it felt like to cry out and find no answer. And they refuse to let others feel that same emptiness. What they offer isn't a cheap, comforting phrase. It's a presence that says, I've been where you are. I'm not afraid of your pain. You don't have to pretend here. And that, in this world, is sacred. Because we're all starving for that kind of permission to be whole, even when we're wounded. To be accepted, not in spite of our scars, but in part because of them. The truth is, when you've suffered deeply, you're offered a strange kind of invitation. You can become hardened, bitter, closed off, angry at the world, or you can choose something harder. You can choose to let that pain open you, stretch you, make you gentler, wiser, more human. And the ones who choose that, who choose love when they had every reason not to, those are the people who change the atmosphere just by entering the room.